Welcome to this daily PBJ devotional. Read Exodus 14, Job 32, and Psalms 27 through 29 today. This devotional is about Exodus 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before Pi-hahiroth between Migdol and the sea. You are to encamp by the sea, directly opposite Baal-zephon. For Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, 'They are wandering the land in confusion. The wilderness has boxed them in.' And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, so that he will pursue them. But I will gain honor by means of Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." So this is what the Israelites did. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have released Israel from serving us." So Pharaoh prepared his chariot and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites, who were marching out defiantly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-hahiroth, opposite Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up and saw the Egyptians marching after them, and they were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us into the wilderness to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Did we not say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, so that we may serve the Egyptians'? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses told the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the Lord's salvation, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. And as for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they will go in after them. Then I will gain honor by means of Pharaoh and all his army, and chariots and horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord, when I am honored through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." And the angel of God, who had gone before the camp of Israel, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from before them and stood behind them, so that it came between the camps of Egypt and Israel. The cloud was there in the darkness, but it lit up the night. So all night long neither camp went near the other. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind that turned it into dry land. So the waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with walls of water on their right and on their left. And the Egyptians chased after them, all Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen, and followed them into the sea. At morning watch, however, the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians from the pillar of fire and cloud, and he threw their camp into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to wobble, so that they had difficulty driving. "Let us flee from the Israelites," said the Egyptians, "for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal state. As the Egyptians were retreating, The Lord swept them into the sea. The waters flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had chased the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. But the Israelites had walked through the sea on dry ground, with walls of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore. When Israel saw the great power that the Lord had exercised over the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and believed in him and in his servant Moses. This is God's word. Humanly speaking, Israel was in deep trouble. Though God had delivered them using the plagues, Pharaoh quickly realized how much productivity would be lost when the Israelites left Egypt. We saw that in verse 5. With horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, as verse 9 puts it, the Egyptian army pursued Israel. Despite all that God had done, inflicting horrible plagues on the Egyptians while simultaneously protecting the Israelites, despite all of that, Israel was terrified when the Egyptian army approached. And who wouldn't be? Israel had no army, no weapons. They had the Red Sea before them and the Egyptian army behind them. It was a hopeless situation, humanly speaking. All they had was this promise: the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. That's verse 14 in the NIV. That promise was all they needed, though. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore, as verse 30 in the NIV put it. When Israel trusted God's promises and obeyed God's command, God saved them from certain destruction. When we read a passage like this, there's a strong tendency for Christians to generalize the Lord's work here and apply it to any difficult situation. The Lord will fight for us, we think, when we are in a financial crunch or a personal dispute or some other kind of unpleasant problem. But that cheapens the miracle that God literally did for Israel. It treats God's work like a myth or a fable, a story told to teach a lesson rather than a historical account of God's work. So instead, we should understand that God protected Israel because God had made promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. And those promises were both unfulfilled yet, and they were necessary to God's larger plan to bring redemption through Israel's Messiah, Jesus, to the entire world. But there's still truth here for us, which is that God keeps his promises and preserves his people. While God may allow some of his people to be persecuted and martyred, he will protect his church, collectively speaking, against all the attacks of Satan. You can see Matthew 16, verse 18, for that promise from Jesus. God will even fight miraculously for them in the future. You can read Revelation 19, verses 11 through 21 to see that. God's promise to us is not that he will never allow us to be attacked or that he won't let us be defeated, but rather his promise is that he is with us always to the very end of the age, as Matthew 28:20 put it. No matter what God allows in your life or what God allows to happen to the church in general, we have the promise of his presence with us, whether in victory or in suffering. The truth to take away from this passage is the same one that Israel took from this incident. Verse 31 says from the NIV, "And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses his servant." Again, that's verse 31 from the NIV. We should fear God and trust him, no matter what happens, because God always keeps his promises and works his will through the circumstances we face in life. If you found this devotional helpful, maybe you should go to my website, dailypbj.com/subscribe, and enter your email address there in the form. Then each day you will receive an email from me that contains a link to that day's readings, a link to the audio and video of these devotionals, and a transcript of them as well, in order to help you be in God's Word every day. Please consider becoming part of my financial support network if you find these devotionals to be helpful to you. Go to dailypbj.com/support for that. Please share this with someone who needs the encouragement today, and I'll see you next time. May God bless you. I hope you have a great day today.